And just like that, OTAs are about over. The last public practice that the media are able to see happen today. We're going to give you the update. MVS, Skyy Moore, Josh Gordon. Who are Mahomes' connections developing with, and who else is standing out as they wrap up OTAs today on Locked On Chiefs?
From the land of the free and the home of the Chiefs, this is the Locked On Chiefs podcast.
Welcome back, everybody. It's Locked On Chiefs from an undisclosed location. Thanks for joining us again. We're part of Locked On Podcast Network. You know that. Your team every day for free on every platform, including this one, YouTube, where you can like, sub, and hit the bell, and then on all the audio platforms as well. We appreciate your checking us out. It's been slow going, but they've gotten there, and we like to cover the OTAs as part of the offseason program. We cover all that over at Rogate PC, as well as all your draft matrix stuff, everything you need to know about the personnel that's ending up on this roster and every other one for that matter. And you can always check out NFL33.com as well.
And I'm Chris Clark. You can find me over at Chiefs Corner. We're going to be talking a lot about the Orlando Brown salary cap situation or his contract situation. And how that is going to play into all the different contracts that have been signed by left tackles in the past couple of years, and kind of where he ranks as well. So I'll get into that this weekend. Lots to talk about when it comes to OTAs and the last media day of OTAs before mandatory minicamp. And let's just go ahead and jump in and talk about the different players that came out. That stood out.
And it's been a steady progression, but it hasn't been really flashy, with the Chiefs only allowing media one practice per week. We kind of get these incremental updates, right? And today was a lot of pass catcher information. And Patrick had the game that he played, the golf game thing. So like last week is even reduced in terms of what we thought we were going to see. But today we find out just how much Marquez Valdes-Scantling, got to remember to say the Quez, how much he's progressing. I know you guys talked about him a little bit with Matt this week as well. But I think that's a pleasant surprise that he seems to be catching on rather quickly. That's not to say that Juju isn't, but certainly so far, one of the standouts has been MVS. And I think that's a positive going forward because he came along a little bit after Juju, so like there was a little bit of less time to prepare. But I think that bodes well for getting into the season and having a guy that can start at the X that's going to help Patrick get the ball out.
I agree, and I think that you look at what it also means. One of the things that they talked about was MVS caught a no-look pass from Mahomes today in OTAs. Yes, it's OTAs. Yes, it really doesn't matter. But he said after practice, one of the things he talked about after practice was he learned by playing with Aaron Rodgers that you always have to be ready for the ball, regardless of whether or not you think he's looking at you, regardless of whether or not you think he's coming your way. You'll always have to be ready for the ball. You always have to be looking for it. And that, I think, is going to serve him very well with Kansas City and Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah, because it might just be OTAs now, but he will do it in the ball game. So we all know that. I think that's going to be really entertaining. And to see a guy that this is his chance, really, to make a statement that he has been capable of more than he's shown in Green Bay. And obviously, it's a very lucky thing for him. I mean, certainly you chose to come here as well, but it's fortunate for a guy's career to play with one guy who should be pushing, greatest in his franchise history, possibly. You can have that argument about him and Favre, but a guy that's won a Super Bowl, that has been the MVP. Like, I don't know if Hall of Fame's on Aaron Rodgers' plate coming up, but it could be. To go from that to Patrick Mahomes, not many people have more luck than MVS right now.
I don't think there's a question in my mind whether or not Aaron Rodgers will be in the Hall of Fame, but that's a whole other story that we don't need to get into. But I do think it's interesting. And in some ways, I think Marquez's contract is actually going to play in Kansas City's favor because you look at that contract. I know it says 3 years. I know that there's guaranteed money in year 2. That doesn't mean they're not going to move on. If he bombs in Kansas City, I don't think he's back in 2023. I don't expect that. I'm not trying to say I expect that. I'm not saying that that's what's going to happen. But he has to play, and he has to play well enough to get the second year of his contract and show that he can do more. And I think that he is capable of it. So, I'm rooting for him to do well in OTAs, in training camp and mini camp, and obviously the season.
Yeah, I mean, and like you said, you're not rooting against it, but that provides some motivation. It's not quite a contract year, but the fact that that you could be parted with, it's getting up there, right? And so that keeps you on your edge, that keeps you sharp, and it keeps you driving. And I think that overall is what you want to see from him, as well as the rest of the pass catchers. Another guy that stood out was Josh Gordon, going for a TD today in practice. And I think, again, that's OTAs on shells or air. I don't even know what period it was in. But the connection's got to be there. Like, they gave you as much time as they could last season. You got to show that you can click now. And so I'm going to take that as a positive. He's had kind of a quiet camp. So at this point,
but they are saying that he is doing better than he was last year. So I did see Reed talk about him a little bit, or maybe it was another player or another coach. I don't remember exactly. I know I saw somebody say something that he looks better this year. He looks, his routes are better. His, catching is better. All of it's better this year. And that's to be expected with as much time as he had off.
Yeah, you'd hope so. The last pass catcher that stood out, and only because he was a participant, was Skyy Moore. And Andy had some comments in his presser today that he looks good for what we're asking him, because they got to pepper him in. He's a little bit behind in terms of install, et cetera, et cetera. I think he'll be able to make that up. I'm really interested to see what they do next week, mandatory minicamp, where he should be in the mix. If the hamstring's good and they've held him back until now, and now they're starting to loosen him up, we should see more of him next week. I'm looking forward to that.
I'm looking forward to it too, and I think that peppering him in is really the right way to go about it. I think if you go back, and I always hate comparing to Hill, but the reality is that Skyy Moore was drafted. They really haven't drafted a high round wide receiver since, a guy like, and Tyreek Hill wasn't a high round wide receiver, but he was expected to do things after what you saw in training camp. But they didn't just throw the entire offense at him. Yeah. They had him do specific things. They had him come along, figure out a role in this offense. And he doesn't have to be a star. He doesn't have to be the number one wide receiver day one. And whether or not he ever develops into that role is a question as well with the size. But I do think that he has the ability to be that eventually, potentially, if he's able to unlock his potential and do all of the things that he was capable of coming out of school. I mean, I'd say that's probably his highest end is a good number one receiver, but that's a long way away.
It is.
I think you have to pepper him in the offense as you can, get him to know one or two positions. Don't worry about him knowing every single position. Try to help him with learning how to read defenses, to try to beat zones and that kind of stuff. But you're not going to be able to throw everything at him like you would a veteran that kind of understands some of that stuff already.
Right. Like an MVS.
Right.
This is how it works.
Where's Juju?
First step is first step. Second step, we're going to talk about that next, with a pair of guys taking their second step together and how they come together and what that's going to do for this team in particular. But got to tell you first, BetOnline is your number one source for all your betting information, for everything now, from props on football, the coming training camp. You can see it from here, folks. We're probably talking 7 weeks. We don't know the dates yet, but there's a lot coming down the pike, as well as the hockey playoffs, the basketball playoffs. We're into finals now. Big section that you might want to put some money down on if you need extra information, if you need podcasts, if you need any kind of tidbit to really make the difference in your betting strategy. BetOnline's got it all for you there, with all the wagering information that you need, including live betting, esports, and more. Head over to the website. Super easy to use, even from your mobile device. It's BetOnline, where the game starts. Now, two guys that are ready to take their second step, and for Willie Gay, it's even a little bit more like a third, although when you piece together the injuries, it's probably still in the second. Some comments today from Andy Reid about how Nick Bolton and Willie Gay are more comfortable in what they're doing and working together in particular, and that they should be the two linebackers that are on the field the most. And I hope that translates into two of them being on the field more than we've seen in past years.
I agree with you, and I think it's easily going to be that way just because you're not going to have Anthony Hitchens here anymore. So I think that's going to be the direction they go. It's going to be curious to see how they platoon the three linebackers, if they use Chanel in certain situations versus using Bolton. I do think, what we saw from Bolton last year and what we saw in the preseason didn't really make you feel very comfortable about him having a full-time role, but he grew into it as the season went on, and I think that's what's important to notice.
Agreed. And that's that progress, even though it was probably a little bit ahead of time. Like, we didn't feel he was going to start because of the presence of Hitchens. Now that's clearly been taken away. Now it's about who you're going to support Nick with. And maybe that's Leo Chanel. Maybe that's Jermaine Carter. Maybe that's Mike Rose. We're going to have to see. I think those are still the top five. But it comes down to being a pair with Willie Gay Jr., being able to cover the interior inside the hashes with Willie in coordination and taking that weakness that's been there for quite a while and trying to shore that up this season.
Yeah, and I think one of the big things that you watched last season that he just got so much better at is just diagnosing plays, understanding what was going on. And I think that's – I don't want to sit here and try to say that that's why he didn't look as good in the preseason as maybe we expected him to. But he certainly wasn't playing the way he was towards the middle of the season or even the end of the season in the preseason. That's why we were a little concerned about his presence and what he was going to do. I'm not concerned about that anymore. He's shown he knows what's going on. And I think the mental processing, the step up to the NFL, just adjusting to the league. And we said at the time it was going to be a question because of his lack of athleticism and his lack of some skill sets when it comes to agility and being, a slower linebacker that could cause issues. But he has progressed to a point where he shows you his instincts are carrying him, and that is something you can't teach, and that is something that they can definitely build on.
Yeah, and they're going to have to. And I'm excited because he reached his potential from what I saw last year. It was kind of where I thought I'd see him either this season or maybe even the following season. So he's well ahead of the development plan that I kind of thought he would follow. That's great. Can they get that out of Lou Chanel as well, or Mike Rose as well? Possibly. We'll see. They have Carter as the veteran, but that tandem with Willie kind of understanding now where he can tear it loose. They both, in Nick Bolton and Willie Gay, are instinctual enough to make plays behind the line of scrimmage. They sniff things out on the edges, and that's important. And I think Nick has shown more speed than he tested with in getting out to some of those screen and dump off spots that he's going to have to be able to take charge of this season. And if it continues like this, it is about comfort because that makes you faster. There's that old saying, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And that's what you have to get to.
Yeah, and it's also about not just instincts, but it's knowing the playbook, knowing what your opponents are going to do. Because I guarantee you, in a lot of those plays where he ended up in the backfield, he knew what was coming before the ball was snapped, or at least right as the ball was snapped. He saw whatever he saw that was his key and said, this is what they're doing. I need to be here. And that's how he got there. I mean, that's how people that don't have great speed, like he showed in his pro day and in the combine, that's how people like that, or that's how players like that get to a point where they're able to ascend past where you'd expect.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's some other young guys. We'll talk about two young guys, one in a contract situation, one in a new-ish role, as well as an old player for the Chiefs that did something special today. We'll hit you with that next.
So let's talk about the guy that did something a little bit special for the Chiefs today.
Mm-hmm.
Brandon Flowers retired a Chief. That's kind of surprising to me, actually.
Is it really?
Just a little. I mean, he went to the Chargers, so I guess I was thinking that there seemed to be a little animosity, and it took several years for him to actually retire. So, I'm glad to see it happen. I think he played for Kansas City very well, and I think that he deserves his due and his credit. So I'm glad for them to see them get it done.
Yeah, I enjoy seeing that as well. I really enjoyed Brandon's time. He went on to other teams and had some success. Brandon Carr went on to have some success elsewhere in Dallas. But as a tandem, they were for a couple of seasons. I thought they performed well, and I think they were fun to watch. I'm glad to see him come back. And I just wanted to ask you, I actually enjoy the fact that they do these little ceremonies during OTA so that they can walk out to the guys on the current roster at practice and kind of hang out and get a little bit of adulation and that kind of thing. I thought it was cool.
Yeah, that was very cool. And I think, and I'll be honest, I didn't see this one for him specifically, but I know in certain situations they've had players go into the huddle and do, whatever type play it is. For Charles a few years ago, I think they had him run the ball, and I can't remember, other ones, Dwayne Bowe maybe caught a pass or, just different things like that. I think that that's a great thing for the team to do. And, it gives those players also, it gives the current players guys that this organization has revered in the past that they can look to and see this is what they did as a career. This is what they did as a professional. This is what I need to be doing in some regards to get to that level.
Yeah, I think it's a great example to set. Now, hopefully everybody follows that. One guy that's going to do that is Orlando Brown. We talked at length about him this week, but Andy had a couple of comments today to really kind of, I think, underline that it is mandatory minicamp next week. He is a professional. That, to me, signals that we should see him next week.
I don't expect it.
No?
I'll just be honest. I don't think Matt expects it either. He's not under contract. There's nothing that they can do to make him be there. So he hasn't signed his tender. If he had signed his franchise tender, he would be required to be there. So that I would expect. But with the message that we got yesterday from Orlando Brown and his agent, I fully expect him not to be there next week, even though it is a mandatory minicamp. But again, he's not under contract right now.
Right. Until he signs, he isn't mandated, right? I'm going to buck the system. I think a lot of people feel that way and have that expectation that you guys have. I think he might show up and just not do anything and just be like, hey, I could be here working if you'd pay me. You know what I mean? Like, that feels like a stunt that we might see, but I could be wrong.
Maybe. I would love to see it, because I think the other part of that is if he got in the building, and this is why I'm not so sure that he would show up. If he gets in the building, they're going to want him to do, a couple of things. They're going to want to weigh him in. They're going to want, they're going to be looking at him up and down, trying to see, is he kept in shape? How are you going to know that otherwise? Right. So, there's a lot of things that they would do if he came into the building or they would be asking him to do. So I just don't know that he's going to show up. But, I would like it if he did. I would like it if he practiced. I just don't expect it because, again, he's not under contract. So it would be surprising for him to be there. But I would love to be wrong.
I'll cross my fingers. I might be wishful thinking here, but you never know. Maybe he just, maybe he can get some energy from it by not being there and understanding what pressure that puts on. And energy is something that is out there as well. And Nick Bolton had an interesting quote that Willie Gay and Justin Reed are competing for who brings the most energy to these practices. And that's good to see. I think Juan Thornhill looks a little bit more enthusiastic than he has in years past during OTAs as well. So maybe the whole thing is everybody get going and raise the whole boat. And at this point in the year, for a team with this much experience, I think that's a positive sign.
Yeah, and you also have a certain area where, you're going to have another guy in Brian Cook who's probably going to be a guy that's going to be trying to bring a lot of energy when he gets on the field. So, I think that the defense having that kind of, that kind of thing be there and do that, I think that's a great sign. I think that's something that could be encouraging for this unit. You start looking at who else is going to be there that hasn't been there the past couple of weeks. Chris Jones and Frank Clark haven't been there. So expect to see him next week, but they haven't been there to this point.
Yeah, that's going to be something really interesting that I want a little bit of information on. Like, what has Chris done? It's been kind of quiet. Like, he's been tweaking, right? He lost some weight last year to get prepared to play some end, right? I think that did make him quicker, and it probably did help him a bit as the season wore on. But I also felt like he wore down a little bit more than we'd seen in previous seasons. So where does he come in? How does he look? I know there's a lot of worry about Frank Clark and his weight as well. Like, what are we going to get from those two stars that, as the way that this offseason has turned out, they have to be the stars that the team has hoped them to be?
Yeah, and there's a big question right now is why is Chris Jones not there? He's under contract the next 2 years. Frank Clark's under contract this year. You could ask questions as to why they're both not there. I know it's voluntary. I hope that this has nothing to do with Aaron Donald just getting this huge, enormous contract extension that he just got, and that Chris is going to be there and that everything's fine. So that would be the hope. I'm just curious to see both of them show up and see what kind of shape they're in and see how things are going. And really the other side of it for me is, say what you want about Frank Clark, have your opinion about what Frank Clark is able to do in the NFL still, but he still brings a ton of knowledge to this team doesn't have otherwise. And that is something that is going to serve George Karlaftis well if he can get in the same room with Frank Clark and just learn from him and learn about different things he's looking at, be in the same team or the same positional room and all of that stuff. That's all going to help Karlaftis get better.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking forward to that. We'll have more updates for you as they come in, folks. We'll be back with you next week.
I got one more thing.
Oh, go for it.
Sorry, real quick. Josh Williams signed his contract. Joshua Williams signed his contract. He is the next to last rookie to sign. Skyy Moore is the only rookie that is now not under contract for the Chiefs. So look for that to be happening. I would expect probably that to be happening maybe next week. Obviously, it'll happen before training camp starts. So it's not going to be something where Skyy Moore's not going to be a mandatory minicamp. He was already at OTAs.
Yeah.
He will be there. The only thing that's really holding those types of contracts up right now is people negotiating around them at different position levels and trying to figure out. So I expect that to get done very soon.
Yeah, rookie contracts are nothing to be concerned about. I know everybody's been up in arms about when are they going to get signed. It doesn't matter. They will sign. There is so little to even be discussed, let alone contended with.
Especially in second-round contracts. I mean, first-round contracts at this point are pretty much fully guaranteed for 5 years almost.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there you go. It's going to be something to watch.
So everybody enjoy your weekend. Don't worry about contracts. Not going to be a problem. But we'll be back with you. I hope you enjoy your weekend, and we'll be back Monday, ready to go. Sunday night will be release time. Thanks for listening to us today. We'll talk to you then.